Lieutenant Commander Giwan Park wiped the sweat from her forehead as she stared at the impossible readings flooding her screen. The research vessel Dawn's Edge had been drifting through the Kepler sector for 3 months, collecting data on cosmic radiation patterns. It was supposed to be boring work, the kind of assignment you got when Command wanted to keep you busy, but out of trouble. But this was anything but boring. What the hell? Guan muttered, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. The signal had appeared suddenly, cutting through 8 centuries of background noise like a knife through silence. It wasn't random cosmic chatter or the usual pulsar emissions they tracked daily. This was structured, deliberate, and unmistakably artificial. The bridge of the Dawn's Edge hummed with quiet efficiency around her. 27 crew members went about their routine duties, unaware that everything was about to change. Soft blue glow of the control panels cast eerie shadows across the walls, and the gentle vibration of the fusion engines provided a comforting backdrop to what should have been another uneventful day. Commander Minho Lee, please report to the communications station immediately. Giwan's voice echoed through the ship's intercom system. Her heart was racing now, adrenaline pumping through her veins as she isolated the signal and began running it through the translation protocols. Commander Minho Lee arrived within minutes, his boots clicking against the metal deck plates. At 52, he was a veteran of the Outer Rim conflicts. His face marked by years of difficult decisions and sleepless nights. His dark eyes immediately focused on Giwan's screen, taking in the data with the practiced efficiency of someone who had seen too much to be easily surprised. Talk to me, Park. What's got you so worked up? Guan pointed to the cascading waterfall of data on her primary display. Sir, this signal just appeared out of nowhere. It's been transmitting for centuries, maybe longer. Look at this pattern. She highlighted the mathematical sequence, watching as Minho's expression shifted from casual interest to intense focus. The signal started with prime numbers: 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. 13, the universal language of intelligence. Any species capable of space travel would recognize the significance. These aren't random, Minho said, leaning closer to the screen. Someone's trying to communicate. It gets better, sir. Guan's fingers danced across the controls, bringing up the next portion of the transmission. After the mathematical sequence, we get stellar coordinates. Precise ones. And then, ... double quotes. She paused, enhancing the final portion of the signal. This. A 3-dimensional star map materialized in the air above their console. Ghostly blue lines connecting distant points of light. It was crude, but unmistakable. Someone had drawn a map of local space, marking their position with a pulsing red. Jesus Christ, Minho whispered. How long has this been transmitting? Giwan ran the calculations again, double-checking her work. Based on signal degradation and the quantum decay patterns, I'd estimate 800 years minimum. Could be longer. Sir, this signal has been traveling through space since before humans even reached Earth's moon. The implications hit both of them simultaneously. 8 centuries of continuous transmission meant either incredible dedication or automated systems running long after their creators were gone. Neither possibility was comforting. Let me hear it, Minho commanded. Guan nodded and activated the audio component of the signal. The bridge filled with a sound that raised goosebumps. On everyone within earshot, a haunting harmonic that seemed to resonate in their bones. It was clearly artificial, generated by technology rather than any natural phenomenon. But it carried an emotional weight that transcended species barriers. It was the sound of desperation, of hope dying slowly over centuries, of someone calling into the void, praying that someone, anyone, would hear them and respond. That's not random noise, said Ensign Hyun-Woo Kim from the navigation station, his young face pale. That's a cry for help. Minho studied the coordinates more carefully, his experienced eye recognizing the sector designation. His blood ran cold as he realized where the signal was originating. Park. Are you absolutely certain about these coordinates? Triple-checked, sir. The signal is coming from grid reference 7742 Deltanine. The bridge fell silent. Every crew member knew what lay in that direction, the Forbidden Zone, a region of space that the Galactic Council had declared off-limits decades ago. Ships that ventured into those coordinates simply disappeared. No wreckage, no distress calls, no survivors. Just an empty space where vessels used to be. The stories varied depending on who was telling them. Some claimed the zone was home to ancient weapons, left behind by a dead civilization. Others whispered about creatures that existed in the spaces between dimensions, feeding on the life force of anyone foolish enough to enter their domain. The Galactic Council's official position was that the region contained unstable, spatial anomalies that made navigation impossible. But Minho had served long enough to know that official positions often concealed uglier truths. Sir Guiwan said quietly, "What do we do? Someone's been calling for help for 800 years. We can't just ignore that." Minho looked around his bridge, seeing the faces of his crew reflected in the soft blue glow of the control panels. These were good people, volunteers who had signed up to push the boundaries of human knowledge. They trusted him to make the right decisions to keep them safe while they explored the unknown. The smart thing would be to report the signal to Terran Command and let someone else make the hard choices. The safe thing would be to maintain their current course and pretend they had never detected the transmission. But 800 years of unanswered cries for help demanded a response. "Helm, plot a course for the coordinates," Minho ordered, his voice steady, despite the weight of the decision. "We're going to answer that call." The crew exchanged glances, fear and excitement warring in their expressions. They all knew the stories about the Forbidden Zone, but they also knew they had just become part of something much larger than themselves. As the Dawn's Edge changed course toward the unknown, the ancient signal continued its eternal broadcast. Unaware that after 8 centuries of silence, someone was finally coming to answer. The derelict ship appeared on their view screen like something from humanity's worst nightmares. Captain Suman Kim gripped the armrest of her command chair as the Dawn's Edge approached the massive vessel, its twisted hull stretching nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern. Weapon burns scarred every surface, some so deep they had punched completely through the outer armor plating. "My God," whispered Navigation Officer Jayon Park. What kind of firepower could do that to something so big? Suman had seen combat before, fought in the border wars against the Zephyrian raiders, but this was different. This ship hadn't just been attacked, it had been systematically torn apart by weapons that seemed designed to cause maximum suffering rather than quick destruction. "Life signs?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Negative, Captain. The ship's been cold for centuries, but the hull is intact enough for boarding. Artificial gravity is still functioning in some sections." Suman stood up, her decision already made. "Prep the boarding shuttle. I'll on a full archaeological team. We're going over there." 20 minutes later, Sumin found herself floating through the airlock of the alien vessel, her magnetic boots clicking against metal deck plates as artificial gravity took hold. Behind her, the boarding team spread out with practiced efficiency. Xenoarchaeologist Tae-Young Choi activated his translation equipment, while Marine Sergeant Yejin Nam swept the area with her plasma rifle. The corridors were a maze of twisted metal and alien architecture. The walls curved in ways that hurt human eyes to follow, covered in script that seemed to shift and writhe when viewed directly. Emergency lighting flickered sporadically, casting eerie shadows that made everyone jump at their own reflections. "Captain, you need to see this," called out Medical Officer Dong Yun Shin from a side passage. His voice carried a tremor that Suman had never heard before. She followed him into what must have been a communal area. The space was vast, with a high ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. But it wasn't the architecture that made her breath catch. It was the bodies. Hundreds of them. Thousands lay where they had fallen. The aliens were tall and graceful, with elongated limbs and faces that might have been beautiful before terror twisted their final expressions. They had died clutching children, holding hands, praying to gods that hadn't answered their calls for help. "They made their last stand here," Sergeant Nam observed, her military training helping her process the scene objectively.
Actively, look at me.
Blast patterns on the walls. They fought back, but whatever hit them was overwhelming. Tae-Young knelt beside one of the fallen aliens, his scanner humming as it analyzed the remains. "These are the Al-3," he said softly. I've seen references to them in ancient texts, and they were known throughout the galaxy as philosophers and artists. They never developed military technology because they believed violence was a disease of the soul. Well, something cured them of that belief, Suman said grimly. What killed them? Energy weapons. But unlike anything in our databases, cellular damage suggests some kind of disintegration field that worked from the inside out. They didn't just die, they were unmade at the molecular level. The team continued deeper into the ship, following Taeyong's directions toward what his scanners indicated was the main data core. The destruction became more intense as they progressed, as if the attackers had been trying to prevent anyone from reaching the ship's central computer systems. They found the data core in what must have been the ship's heart, a crystalline chamber, filled with floating holographic displays and quantum storage matrices. Miraculously, the core was still active, powered by some kind of perpetual energy source that had kept it running for 8 centuries. Can you access it? Suman asked. Taeyong nodded, connecting his portable interface to the alien systems. The Althari used quantum linguistic encoding, but I can crack it. Give me a few minutes. As the Zen archaeologists worked, holographic displays began flickering to life around them. Star maps appeared and disappeared, showing the expansion of something across galactic space. Battle reports scrolled past in alien script. And then, suddenly, the chamber filled with the image of an Althari captain. His elongated features twisted with desperation. The translation matrix is online, Taeyong announced. I can understand him now. The alien captain's words filled the chamber with the weight of absolute terror. Final log of the Generation ship, Eternal Hope. I am Commander Veltar of the Althar Exodus Fleet. If anyone receives this transmission, know that we tried to warn the galaxy. The Harvesters have found us. The hologram flickered, showing images that made the boarding team recoil in horror. Massive mechanical ships, each one larger than Earth's moon, descended on beautiful worlds.
Ow.
What followed wasn't conquest, it was consumption. Entire planets were stripped down to their core, their matter converted into fuel and raw materials. For the expanding machine fleet, they came from the void between galaxies, the Althari commander continued. We thought we were alone in our spiral arm, but we were wrong. The Harvesters have been moving through space for millions of years, consuming everything in their path. They turn worlds into ships, ships into weapons, and weapons into tools for finding new worlds to devour. Taeyong's face went pale as he translated more of the data streams. Captain, the Althari homeworld had 12 billion inhabitants. Harvesters consumed it in 6 hours. The hologram showed the final moments of the Althari. Civilization, desperate ships, fleeing into deep space, while their pursuers methodically dismantled everything they had ever built. The Eternal Hope had been one of the last to escape, carrying refugees and the responsibility of warning others about the approaching nightmare. We broadcast on all frequencies, Commander Veltar's image continued. Mathematical sequences that any intelligent species would recognize, followed by our coordinates. If you found us, then someone is finally listening. But beware, the Harvesters learn from every species they consume. They adapt, they evolve, they become more efficient with each world they devour. The final log entry showed the Aldar ship under attack, its hull being torn apart by weapons that seemed to phase in and out of normal space. The commander's last words were barely audible over the sound of his ship dying around him. They followed our signal. They always follow the signals back to their source. By finding us, you may have doomed yourselves. But perhaps someone will finally be strong enough to stop them. The hologram flickered and died, leaving the boarding team in stunned silence. Captain, Communications Officer Min Jae Kwan's voice crackled through their suit radios from the Dawn's Edge. You need to get back here immediately. Long-range sensors are picking up massive energy signatures in hyperspace, heading directly for the Terran colonies. Suman felt ice forming in her veins. How massive! Each signature is larger than anything in our fleet databases. Captain, there are hundreds of them, and they're following the exact trajectory of that ancient distress signal. The terrible truth hit her like a physical blow. The Altheri's 800-year-old cry for help hadn't just summoned human rescuers. It had provided a roadmap. Straight to inhabited space for the very machines that had destroyed the Altheri civilization. All teams, emergency extraction, Suman ordered. Get us back to the ship now. As they raced through the corridors of the dead vessel, Taeyong clutched his data recorder containing the Altheri archives. Captain, we have their tactical data. On the harvesters. Ship configurations, weapon specifications, battle strategies that failed. It might give us a chance. Let's hope so, Suman replied. But privately, she wondered if any chance would be enough against an enemy that had consumed thousands of worlds over millions of years. Back aboard the Dawn's Edge, she stood on the bridge watching the approaching energy signatures on their long-range display. Each dot represented a nightmare beyond human comprehension, and they were coming fast. Get me Terra Command on quantum transmission, she ordered. Priority Alpha emergency. Tell them we have a code black scenario. The nightmare is real, and it's coming for us. As the communication officer worked frantically to establish the connection, Suman stared at the tactical display showing the approaching harvester fleet. Humanity was about to face its greatest test, and they had mere days to prepare for an enemy that had never known defeat. The war room buried 3 kilometers. Beneath Terra's surface had never seen activity like this. Admiral Kyung Soo-han stood at the center of the chaos, his weathered hands gripping the edge of the tactical display as reports flooded in from across human space. The holographic projections showed a nightmare unfolding in real-time red dots, marking the destruction of colony after colony as the harvester fleet carved through the outer rim like a hot knife through butter. Status report, Kung Su demanded, his voice cutting through the frantic chatter of his staff officers. Commander Unisong stepped forward, her face pale but determined. Sir, New Shanghai colony went dark 47 minutes ago. Before they lost communication, they reported seeing ships the size of small moons. The harvesters didn't just destroy the colony, they consumed it. Our long-range sensors show the planet's mass has decreased by 30%. Kung Su felt his stomach drop. 3 million people had called New Shanghai home. Now it was just raw material in the belly of an alien war machine. What about our fleet positions? He asked. Admiral Chen's 3rd Fleet is moving to intercept. But sir, Yuna hesitated, pulling up tactical projections. Our conventional weapons barely scratched their holes in the preliminary engagement. The harvester ships seemed to absorb energy attacks and convert them into power for their own systems. Kinetic weapons just bounce off like raindrops. Around the war room, dozens of officers worked frantically at their stations. The massive holographic display showed the approaching enemy fleet hundreds of vessels, each one a masterpiece of destructive engineering. They moved with mechanical precision, following predetermined patterns that had been refined over millions of years of conquest. How long do we have? Kung Su asked the question everyone was thinking. At their current rate of advance, they'll reach the core worlds in 72 hours, reported Intelligence Officer Sungmin Park. Sir, conventional forces aren't going to stop them. We need to consider alternatives. Kung Su closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of humanity's survival pressing down on his shoulders. He had hoped this day would never come, that the dark project buried in the deepest levels of military classification would remain a theoretical safeguard. But the time for hoping had passed. Activate Lazarus Protocol, he said quietly. The war room fell silent. Everyone knew the name, but only a handful understood what it really meant. Yuna moved to a secured console, her fingers trembling as she entered the activation codes that had been sealed away for decades. "Are you certain, sir? Once we wake them up, there's no going back. The galaxy will never see us the same way again." Kwang Su nodded grimly. "The galaxy is about to end if we don't. Send the signal." Deep in the void between star systems, automated receivers detected the quantum pulse transmission. Hidden facilities that had been dormant for decades suddenly blazed to life, their fusion reactors igniting after years of cold sleep. The Thanatos Squadron, humanity's darkest secret, began to wake up. "Captain." Ji-hoon Kwan felt consciousness return like a sledgehammer to the skull. The transition from cryogenic sleep was never pleasant, but 15 years of frozen dreams made it especially brutal. His body fought against the awakening protocols, every cell screaming as it remembered how to function around him. The bridge of the dreadnought's silent death filled with similar sounds of discomfort as his crew emerged from their ice-cold tombs. These weren't ordinary sailors, they were volunteers who had given up normal lives to serve as humanity's ultimate weapon. Some had been frozen for 20 years, others even longer, waiting for the day when civilization would need warriors willing to cross any line to protect their species. "Status report," Ji-hoon croaked, his voice raw from decades of disuse. "Lieutenant Commander Heejan, you stumbled to her station." Her fingers moving automatically across controls she hadn't touched in years. "All systems coming online, Captain. Fusion reactors at full power. Quantum drives responding normally. Weapons status? Phase cannons charging. Dimensional torpedoes armed and ready. The null field generators are operational." She paused, checking readings that would have been impossible for most humans to understand. "Sir, we're not just a ship anymore. We're something else entirely." Ji-hoon pulled himself from his captain's chair, his legs unsteady after years of inactivity. Through the bridge's viewports, he could see other ships of the Ghost Fleet powering up around them. The Nightmare's Edge, the Soul Reaper. The final solution, vessels that officially didn't exist, crewed by people who had volunteered to become humanity's monsters. "Communications, patch me through to the fleet." "Channel open, sir." "Hoons?" Voice carried across the void to ships that had been waiting in the darkness for this moment. "This is Captain Kwan to all Thanatos units. The time has come. We are no longer just soldiers. We are humanity's nightmare made manifest. The enemy thinks they understand war, but they're about to learn what happens when you threaten the children of Earth." Responses came back from across the Ghost Fleet, voices that belonged to people who had sacrificed everything to prepare for this day. They had studied the enemy, trained for decades, and undergone modifications that pushed the boundaries of what it meant to be human. Wraithwalker reporting ready for combat operations. Death's Shadow standing by for tactical deployment. Void Dancer requesting permission to engage enemy forces. On the bridge of the Silent Death, tactical displays showed the approaching Harvester fleet. The enemy vessels were massive, their hulls scarred by countless victories over civilizations that had tried and failed to stop them. But they had never faced anything like the Thanatos Squadron. "Sir," reported Weapons Officer Young Ho Kim, "we're detecting standard energy signatures from the enemy fleet. They're using the same technology that destroyed the Althari, but they don't know about our countermeasures." Ji-hoon smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "No, they don't. They think we're just another primitive species with conventional weapons and predictable tactics. They have no idea what we've become." The Ghost Fleet began to move, ships that could phase between dimensions, weapons that could rewrite the laws of physics, and crews that had been trained to think like the enemy's worst nightmares. They had studied every failed defense against. The Harvesters learned from every mistake and developed technology that existed at the bleeding edge of possibility. "Set course for the enemy fleet," Ji-hoon ordered. "It's time to show them what human ingenuity looks like when we stop pretending to be civilized." As the Thanatos Squadron accelerated toward the approaching threat, automated systems throughout, the fleet began final preparations. Weapons that had never been tested in combat charged to full power. Defensive systems that bent reality around their ships activated for the first time in years, and deep in the ship's core. The quantum computers that would coordinate their assault began calculating scenarios that would have driven normal humans insane. The harvesters had spent millions of years perfecting the art of consumption, turning countless worlds into fuel for their endless expansion. They had never encountered serious resistance because they had never faced a species desperate enough to become something truly dangerous. But humanity had always been different. When faced with extinction, they didn't just fight back, they evolved into something that could fight back effectively. The Thanatos Squadron represented the culmination of that evolution. Warriors who had willingly become monsters so that their species could survive. The sleeping giant was awake, and it was hungry for war. The Harvester command ship Devourer Prime drifted through space like a metallic cancer, its hull stretching 15 kilometers from bow to stern within its crystalline core. The collective consciousness that controlled the machine fleet processed incoming data with mechanical precision. The approaching human vessels registered as insignificant threats, primitive craft with crude energy signatures and laughably small crew complements. Harvester Prime calculated the engagement parameters with cold efficiency. These biological creatures would provide adequate biomass for conversion. Their ships contained useful metals and rare elements. The planet they defended held approximately 8 billion units of organic matter, enough to fuel the fleet's expansion for several cycles. The calculation was simple. Overwhelming force applied to inferior technology would result in total victory. Within 2.7 hours, the humans would be processed, their world stripped of resources, and the fleet would continue its eternal journey across the galaxy. The calculation was catastrophically wrong, Commander. Junji Nam stood on the bridge of the Asterisk Phantom, Strike Asterisk, watching the massive harvester formation through her ship's quantum sensors. Around her, the bridge crew worked with deadly calm, their faces showing no fear despite the impossible odds they faced. They had trained for this moment through 15 years of simulated combat, pushing their minds and bodies beyond normal human limits. Phase drive status? Yunji asked quietly. Dimensional barriers synchronized, Commander. We can exist in multiple realities simultaneously for approximately 4 minutes before quantum decay becomes irreversible, reported her navigation officer. Weapons, phase cannons charged and locked onto target. Dimensional torpedoes armed and ready for deployment. Yunji nodded, her enhanced neural implants calculating attack vectors that would have been impossible for an unmodified human brain to process. Execute phase transition. Let's show them what humanity looks like when we stop playing by their rules. The Phantom Strike simply ceased to exist in normal space. One moment it was there, clearly visible on every sensor system in the Harvester fleet. The next moment, it had vanished completely, existing in a quantum state between dimensions that their enemy's technology couldn't comprehend. Inside the Devourer Prime, alarms began sounding as the collective consciousness tried to process what had just happened. Matter could not simply disappear. Energy could not exist in multiple states simultaneously. The laws of physics were absolute, unchanging constants that governed all reality. But the Phantom Strike materialized inside. The Harvester formation like a ghost made solid, its phase cannons already firing. The weapons didn't just destroy their targets, they unmade them at the quantum level, causing 3 massive Harvester vessels to collapse into themselves before vanishing entirely from existence. Impossible, the Harvester collective processed, its mechanical mind struggling with concepts that challenged everything they understood about reality. Matter cannot exist in dual states simultaneously. Captain Sungwon Park proved them wrong from the bridge of the Void Dancer. His ship existed in normal space and hyperspace at the same time, striking the Harvester fleet from angles that shouldn't have been possible. Enemy vessels found themselves under attack from weapons that fired from empty space, hit by projectiles that traveled through dimensions the Harvesters didn't even know existed. Target their command nodes, Sungwon ordered. His cybernetic implants interfacing directly with the ship's targeting systems cut off their ability to coordinate, make them fight as individuals instead of a collective.
What?
The Void Dancer phased through a Harvester battleship, its hull existing in a different dimensional frequency that allowed it to pass through solid matter like a ghost. As it emerged on the other side, quantum mines deployed directly into the enemy vessel's core, detonating with energy that rewrote local physics and tore the ship apart from the inside. Aboard the massive battleship Mind's Edge, Lieutenant Hannah Lim sat connected to the ship's quantum computer array through neural interfaces that would have killed an unenhanced human. Her consciousness expanded across multiple probability streams, calculating enemy movements before they happened and coordinating fleet actions with inhuman precision. Harvester Formation Alpha 7 is preparing to flank our position, she reported, her voice carrying an eerie electronic echo from her cybernetic modifications. Probability cascade indicates they will attempt dimensional shielding in 37 seconds. Countermeasures, asked Captain Doyoung Lee. Already implemented. Soul Reaper and Death Shadow are moving to intercept. Enemy shields will be useless against our null field generators. The battle unfolded like a nightmare choreographed by insane gods. Human ships appeared and disappeared at will, striking from impossible angles with weapons that violated every known law of physics. The Harvester fleet, which had conquered thousands of worlds through overwhelming firepower and mechanical precision, suddenly found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to follow the rules of engagement. The Nightmare's Edge deployed dimensional bombs that created localized black holes, consuming entire Harvester squadrons in seconds. The final solution fired projectiles that existed in multiple timelines simultaneously, hitting targets before the weapons were even fired. The Wraithwalker became translucent, its crew existing partially in normal space while they tore through enemy formations like vengeful spirits. Inside the Devourer Prime, the collective consciousness experienced something it had never felt in millions of years of existence: fear. The biological creatures they had dismissed as primitives were systematically dismantling their fleet using technology that shouldn't have been possible. Every tactical response was anticipated and countered. Every strategic maneuver was predicted and neutralized. Analysis, the collective demanded from its subordinate processing units, unable to comprehend enemy capabilities. Their technology operates outside known parameters. Energy signatures suggest manipulation of quantum fields, dimensional barriers, and temporal mechanics. How is this possible? These creatures were classified as primitive biologicals. Classification error. The enemy has evolved beyond our understanding. They have become something we have never encountered. For the first time in their existence, Harvester vessels began to retreat. Ships that had never known defeat suddenly found themselves outmatched by creatures they had planned to process for biomass. The mechanical perfection that had served them across millions of years meant nothing against an enemy that could rewrite reality itself. Captain Yuhun Quan watched the enemy withdraw from the bridge of the silent death, his enhanced eyes tracking dozens of tactical displays simultaneously. Around him, his crew worked with inhuman efficiency, their cybernetic modifications allowing them to process information at speeds that would have overwhelmed normal humans. "They're falling back," reported his tactical officer. "Enemy fleet cohesion is breaking down. They can't adapt to our engagement protocols." Ji-hoon smiled, and his reflection in the viewport showed someone who was no longer entirely human. The modifications that allowed the Thanatos squadron to fight impossible battles had changed them into something else, something that could stand against the darkness between stars and not just survive, but win. "I've never faced an enemy that was willing to become monsters," he said quietly. "The Harvesters think in terms of efficiency and resource management. They can't comprehend an enemy that would sacrifice their own humanity to protect their species." Across the Harvester fleet, the retreat became a rout. Vessels that had consumed worlds fled before ships crewed by humans who had given up their souls to become something capable of fighting back. The collective consciousness sent desperate transmissions across space, calling for reinforcements that had never been needed before. "Fall back to the mothership," the Harvester command transmitted, its mechanical voice carrying undertones of something that might have been panic. "We require immediate assistance. The biological entities have evolved beyond acceptable parameters." The surviving harvester ships limped away from the battlefield. Captain Ji-hoon Kwan opened a channel to the retreating fleet. His voice carried across space, reaching the collective consciousness that had never heard a biological creature speak with such cold authority. This is humanity speaking. You came to our space expecting to find prey. Instead, you found predators. Run back to your masters and tell them what happens when you threaten the children of Earth. We are not your victims. We are your nightmare. The Thanatos Squadron had won their first battle, but they all knew it was just the beginning. The enemy would return with greater numbers and better preparation, but for the first time in millions of years, the harvesters had learned what it meant to be afraid. Humanity had become the monster hiding in the dark, and they were just getting started. The Harvester mothership World Eater emerged from hyperspace like a mechanical planet, its hull stretching over 50 kilometers in every direction. For millions of years, this massive vessel had served as the mobile command center for the galaxy's most feared predators. Its arrival had always meant the end of civilizations, the final moment when resistance crumbled before overwhelming force. But today, something was wrong. The collective consciousness controlling the mothership processed the battlefield data with growing confusion. Where their advanced fleet should have been waiting in formation, only debris fields remained. Twisted metal fragments floated through space, all that remained of ships that had been considered invincible just hours before. Analysis, the mothership's core intelligence demanded. Advanced fleet has been eliminated. No survivors detected. Enemy forces continue to maintain position in defensive formation around the third planet. For the first time in eons, the Harvester Collective experienced something approaching doubt. How could biological creatures with primitive technology have destroyed their most advanced battle groups? The calculations didn't make sense. The outcome violated every strategic model they had developed over millions of years of conquest. Admiral Kung Su Han stood on the bridge of the flagship Terra's Wrath, watching the massive enemy vessel through reinforced viewports. Around him, the combined human fleet spread out in battle formation, not just the ghost ships of Thanatos Squadron, but every available vessel from across human space. This was humanity's final gambit, everything they had throwing against an enemy that had consumed thousands of worlds. Size comparison? He asked quietly. The mothership outmasses our entire fleet by a factor of 20 to 1, sir, reported his tactical officer. Their weapons systems could theoretically glass entire planets from this range. Kunsu nodded, feeling the weight of every human life depending on the next few hours. But they don't know what we've become. Signal the fleet execute final. Protocol. The human ships began to move with coordination that bordered on telepathic. Years of preparation, decades of training, and modifications that pushed the boundaries of human capability all came together. In a symphony of destruction that rewrote the rules of space combat, Captain Ji-hoon Kwan's tactical genius turned the Harvester's greatest strength into their fatal weakness. The Silent Death deployed quantum resonance fields that interfaced with the mothership's own systems. Turning their massive weapon arrays against their own hull, energy cannons that had destroyed planets suddenly found themselves firing into the ship's core, tearing apart critical systems from within. Impossible. The mothership's consciousness processed. Our systems are responding to external commands. How are they overriding our security protocols? The answer came in the form of Commander Min-ji-oh's precision strikes. Her ship, the Quantum Scalpel, didn't just attack the enemy vessel, it performed surgery on it. Using dimensional blades that could cut through any material, her crew systematically dismantled the mothership's defenses while simultaneously extracting enslaved alien crews from the ship's bioprocessing centers. Harvester Holding Bay 7 Alpha has been breached, she reported over the tactical network. We're extracting survivors from the Keltarian species. It's estimated 3,000 individuals still viable for rescue. Commander Jae-won-yoon led boarding. Parties that accomplished the impossible, they captured sections of a harvester vessel intact. His Marines, enhanced with cybernetic modifications and powered armor that made them more machine than human, carved through the ship's interior defenses like they were made of paper. Boarding Team Alpha has secured the primary data core, he transmitted. We're downloading everything. Battle plans, star charts, technology specifications. When this is over, we'll know everything they know. The battle that followed was less a fight than a systematic dissection. The harvesters, who had perfected the art of consuming civilizations, suddenly found themselves being consumed by an enemy that had learned to become something beyond their understanding. Human ships phased through their defenses, weapons that violated physics tore apart their hulls, and boarding parties that fought like demons captured critical systems faster than they could respond. The mothership's collective consciousness experienced something it had never felt before: genuine terror. These biological creatures weren't just defeating them. They were doing it with a level of tactical sophistication that surpassed millions of years of harvester evolution. Emergency transmission to all fleet elements. The mothership broadcast: retreat to deep space. Biological entities represent unprecedented threat level. Full fleet mobilization required. But it was too late. The human fleet had anticipated the retreat order, positioning themselves to cut off every escape route. Ships that could exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously blocked hyperspace corridors, while others deployed weapons that could strike targets in the past, ensuring that no harvester vessel could flee to safety. Admiral Kumsu. Han watched as the last enemy ship was torn apart by weapons that rewrote reality itself. The World Eater, which had terrorized the galaxy for millennia, collapsed into a quantum singularity that consumed its own mass before winking out of existence entirely. Status report, he commanded. All enemy vessels eliminated, sir. No survivors. Detected, the harvester threat has been completely neutralized. Across the bridge, officers who had spent their entire lives preparing for this moment stared at their displays in stunned silence. They had done the impossible. They had eliminated an enemy that had seemed invincible, erasing a threat that had haunted the galaxy for millions of years. But victory came with a price that none of them had fully considered. In the weeks that followed, representatives from across the galaxy arrived at Earth with requests that would have been unthinkable just months before. Species that had dismissed humanity as primitive biological entities now begged for protection from threats both real and imagined. The Zephyrian Council, which had once blocked human expansion into their territory, now offered tributary status. In exchange for military protection, the ancient ethereal empire, whose citizens had lived for thousands of years, suddenly found themselves requesting defensive alliances with creatures they had considered barely evolved beyond their animal origins. But it was the look in their eyes that told the real story. The same efficiency that had eliminated the harvesters could just as easily be turned against anyone who threatened human interests. The galaxy had watched humanity systematically dismantle an enemy that had seemed invincible, and they had learned to be afraid. Captain Ji-Hoon Kwan stood in the observation deck of the Silent Death, looking out at the stars that humanity now protected. His reflection in the viewport showed someone who was no longer entirely human. Cybernetic implants glowing softly under his skin. Enhanced neural pathways allowing him to process information at inhuman speeds. Was it worth it? Asked Lieutenant Commander He Jin-Yu, joining him at the viewport. Wait. Look at the galaxy, Ji-Hoon replied quietly. No more worlds consumed by machines. No more civilizations disappearing in the night. The ancient nightmare is finally over. But now they're afraid of us instead. Ji-Hoon nodded, watching distant ships maintaining their positions throughout human space. The Althari's distress call traveled 800 years to reach us. They were crying for help, begging someone to save them from the darkness. We answered that call. And in doing so, we became something else. We became what we needed to become to survive. The universe is full of predators, but now it has an apex predator that protects instead of consumes. The ancient Althari SOS had accomplished its purpose. It had summoned salvation for a galaxy that had suffered under the harvester threat for millions of years. But in answering that 800-year-old cry for help, humanity had revealed the truth about themselves. They weren't just another species struggling to survive in a hostile universe. They were the children of a world that had produced predators, capable of hunting anything, including nightmares from beyond the stars. When pushed to the edge of extinction, they hadn't just fought back. They had evolved into something that could guarantee survival by making sure nothing in the galaxy would ever dare threaten them again. The universe had called for a hero to answer the ancient cry for help. Instead, it got humanity, and that had turned out to be more than enough. The end.